Okay, so since we have about 15 minutes left in the session, I'd like to invite Rich and Roxy back up to join Emily as a welcome to stand up here or we have to. We prefer have a seat. Uh, um, I guess I'd like to start by inviting some questions from folks who haven't gotten any in yet, including folks online that Darby is helping, keeping an eye on the chat. Is there anyone in the room that we want to bring up? Yeah.
Yeah, Emily, so you're with Aquatic Invasive Species Department in New York City, DEC.
Yes.
Is DEC fisheries involved? Are you talking to them at all? The reason I ask is Sam brought up the impact of how economically, he brought up the point of how economically impacted this area is from fishing. When treatment occurs, it's taking away habitat, it's taking away spawning area, it's taking away all these things. It is taking away a lot of the natives as well. Are they aware of any risks of the hydrilla treatments? This is going to get multi-step here, but if the plan is reactive, as was mentioned earlier, and it's knee-jerk, and there's been no proven true eradication, and it's going to continue on and on and on, where are we going long-term here from a fisheries standpoint? Is my son going to be able to enjoy the quality of lake that's here right now in 15 or 20 years?
Yeah, so fisheries, they are, they are involved in that permit process. They will stay in that. And I guess the bigger picture is that we do not do anything about treating the hydrilla. It could get worse. So it's kind of, we're trying to control that issue and not prolong any other negative effects that hydrilla have.
Right, which I understand, and I understand the risk of North End specifically. I've been places fishing that hydrilla is completely carpeted, and I know how bad it is. Where is the balance there of what we're doing? Versus from fisheries to
the balance is right now is we're only treating about in that Aurora area, that northernmost area. We're treating between the two projects about 200 acres or so.
Yeah.
The entire littoral zone is 11,700 acres. Mm-hmm. We're barely treating less than 1% with that application. So the concern that we're taking out spawning habitat and we're taking out that from the entire lake, we're talking about minuscule things that we're targeting right now to avoid if we let this get into that northern end, which is, as you know, that is where predominantly most of the fishing occurs. That is going to, if it gets choked off with hydrilla, that's going to have a much greater impact on that fishery than right now, trying to stop it from getting to that really high quality area and impacting a couple hundred acres out of 11,700.
Yeah. And I understand, in the north end, Union Springs is specifically largest spawning habitat. That area, Aurora, up to, we call it Airport Cove, that's what it's called, yeah. Is also critical, and I know, on top of that, away from spawning, summertime habitat, which is grass, native grass, hydrilla too if it's there, but it's native grass. The fish are being caught at a ridiculously alarming rate, and everybody says, okay, there's a lot of press this year about state record fish, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's because there's no habitat. In that area specifically is where a lot of that damage was done. A lot of tournaments were won, a lot of fish were caught. There's mortality from tournaments, from regular fishing, from allowable DEC creel. So you can go out and catch and kill 5 bass a day. And it's a vulnerable situation where the fish have no habitat. And if it reaches greater areas, if it reaches the north end, if it reaches Union Springs, I just want to make sure fisheries is concerned and involved and be aware and monitoring also what's happening.
Well, they said they monitored the native species. What are we finding on that?
So there was a minor impact, and it was mostly on native species that are seed bearing. So just like the hydrilla tubers, they were able to recover from that. In general, the native populations were resilient. So that monitoring went on for 8 years. But the reports are available.
So we go out and we sample in the treatment area and adjacent to the treatment areas. And what I can say is Curly Leaf pondweed, which is still very dominant up there. Sago pondweed is not touched by our application at all. And it is.
I probably spent more time on that lake than anybody in this room. Not to be on my board.
Yeah.
Okay. In the treatment areas, there is nothing left. There's nothing gone. There's not one weed staining. We went over that, and there's other places that the weeds are disappearing. There's nothing left. Even in the north end, they're getting sparse to where there's nothing.
So what you're talking
I'm just
about,
wondering why. That's all.
right? And when we were out and we were talking about this, I talked about the fact our applications, because they are low concentration, we don't find anything concentrations measurable very far outside of our treatment area. So a lot of the changes that you're seeing in that northern end and in those areas, these are more widespread watershed and climate changes that are happening. The lake itself is adjusting to this newer climate, and it's adjusting to different land use changes that are happening.
I can go to other lakes. I fish terms in other lakes. They don't have a weed problem. The nice, beautiful green grass. The fishing's nice. The water's clear. Cayuga Lake's a muddy mess. It is not clear anymore.
Well, I know when we were out there this past year, there was some pretty bad outcomes too.
And that, I think more algae blooms are going because it's so fast to get the stuff for the algae blooms. Seneca Lake was a mess with algae.
Actually, believe it or not, if you have too much of hydrilla, it can actually redistribute the nutrients and you get worse of them.
Well, I just think
So it's this
we need to
feedback
find
that
a
you're
middle somewhere,
seeing.
because everything's being eradicated.
Yeah.
Some reading that I did about the chemical treatments that you're using. And I was curious about its effect on the fishery and on the fish, and it said, that it was fine for that generation of fish that's there now, but it can have a negative impact on their offspring. This is the reading that I did. But so to say that it doesn't affect the fish, I know, and we haven't really talked about the fish specifically tonight, but I'm just curious about that and what are the effects on the long-term health of the fish itself?
As, like I said, we are applying at levels
I
that are deemed by both the state as well as by USDA,
understand,
and we are very low
and I
when it comes to
understand,
that.
and I do understand your, the need to control the hydrilla, and I understand that you are following the guidelines. I mean, I'm not questioning that.
Sure.
I'm just saying something's up with the lake and with the fish and with and climate change. Sure, I mean, I'm sure there's no one single cause for it, but it is certainly a cause of concern for the lake and for the environment, the ecosystem of the lake.
Well,
Hydrilla being part of it. But
personally, I think that's one of the reasons why the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network, why the task force, and why the lake management plan are so important, because it is able to bring in these competing users of the resource and try to strike that balance of how to manage this. And it may mean in certain areas you're electing to manage for certain groups as opposed to other areas and stuff like that. But I mean, that's the stuff that's being put together so that we can bring these things. That's one of the reasons why we do these public meetings, is to get the information out to you, to get your responses back. We don't just ignore your responses. We come, we take them, we go back, we think about it, we try to work with that. And that's why when I'll go out with the fishermen, and when we're out there, I'll go out with you. And I am going to be analyzing our data, the bio-based data, as well as our rate toss data in the areas where we're treating, and then far away from those areas, to be able to demonstrate the differences that we see between that. We know, because we're applying herbicide, we are going to see its progression in plants, I just know that when we're out there, we're throwing rakes, and very rarely do we come up with a no plant rate. We usually come up with plants. Now, is it the same amount of plants that you may have seen? And I know when we were out there, when we were talking, at least with Casey and you were talking about milfoil as being one of the dominant plants out there at that time, especially up in the Western Lake. I don't see milfoil out there nearly as dense as it used to.
It's been pondweed predominantly. That's 10 years.
Right. So curly leaf and white stem and clasping leaf, those types of plants. Yeah. And sago has been going bananas the past few years. And that stuff is like fishing line on your crop. So
with how draining and difficult that is to navigate, I mean, the north end by late June, early July, it's pretty messed with that. What's the difference between that and hydrilla?
That's actually worse than hydrilla trying to do.
That so it's not.
Yeah, no, I mean, so what you have there is you have a native plant becoming a nuisance species. It's acting like a nuisance to boaters and stuff like that. But I would say that the sago, the way it grows in its habit, it's not going to be nearly as dense, and so it's still going to be better habitat for other organisms, as opposed to obviously the boaters, which are going to suffer in swimming and stuff like that. But I agree. We work down in Ithaca in that sailboat area, and that is so chalked up. There's times we're cleaning our props up and pulling and getting out, pushing the boat because it's easier than trying to boat it through because it's that bad.
Let me jump in real quick on the balance question. And you heard both of these speakers, and I even mentioned it. Funding has been a problem from the very beginning on this effort. The fact that there is still no dedicated funding to do any of these projects is pretty baffling, frankly. They both talked about having to make hard choices about whether you go back to an area because you haven't seen anything for 4 or 5 years, knowing full well that 10 years is the recommended amount of time for exhaustive tubers. You just don't have the resources. So at the Tompkins County Water Resources Council, with the network, with the Cayuga Lake Watershed Intermunicipal Organization, we are all hoping that people will write to your elected officials and tell them that managing invasive species is important and they should fund it so it can be done adequately the first time. Otherwise, you can end up in more chronic situations because it just keeps getting away from you a little bit. It's like that's taking all of your antibiotics. And then, oh gosh, I had another one. I forgot it. But that one's really important. So we'll stick with that one. And I think it's good. But please advocate for DEC in particular as our state agency that has not you in particular. And the invasive species program to be funded to be effective. They can find it, they can hone in, get that area coordinated and not have to turn this into a 30-year effort. And that was the other one. Sorry, I remembered it. So once you find hydrilla or anything like this, that's persistent or easy to spread around, you can never forget that it might be here. It'll be so it's eradicated. Boats move here all the time, right? And boats come and go all the time. So that's when prevention becomes super important. And I don't think we have great prevention measures in New York State either, which is also frustrating. This is a personal opinion. I think we could do more to stop the spread. And then monitoring needs to be supported because you have to be looking. It is hard to find. And the earlier you find it, the easier it is and the less intensively you have to use these kinds of harsher approaches. So advocate to your elected officials to fund those kinds of efforts.
I actually want to hear everyone's questions, so I don't want to say too much for having already asked, but just since it's relevant to the question that was raised, and I think it's important, as to like effects on fish down the line, right? So, I mean, I think that these observations that people make who are spending a lot of time on the lake are super interesting to me, and I learn a lot from them. We do know, I mean, there are studies that are just very recent that even at, approved and regulatory compliant concentrations, there's a group in Wisconsin. I mean, I've linked to this, but let's look at this, and it's only in the last few years that, I mean, there are very few studies on this, right? So if you look at the scientific literature and what the regulations are based on, it's very hard to find information in that literature that are relevant to this. So it's not a question of whether it's compliant with the regulations, but I think we have to square with everybody that knowledge isn't perfect, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
it needs
in
more
this case,
funding
there
to
are,
research.
Yeah.
well, that's fine,
Yeah,
but
let
also it
that
needs a bit of precaution.
What's that?
Well, it needs some precaution and humility about the unknown.
It does.
We can be frank with it.
It does, but at the same token, as we go along, that's why regulations are modified as more data is collected, it's analyzed, and we start realizing levels we thought may have been safe before aren't safe, and vice versa. So we learn by collecting more data, and that's the way we go through it.
And I'll just emphasize too that we need to focus also on understanding these changes in our lake that folks are observing, right? Since I've come into this role with the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network, one of the things I've noticed is that there could be much more research going on in this lake about the ecology of the fish communities, the aquatic vegetation communities, so that we can actually answer some of these harder questions that you guys are bringing up about what the drivers are of the change in the system. So, along with the advocacy for appropriate levels of funding for management, also pushing that agenda forward is going to be really important. And that's where a lot of, the stakeholders in this room who have different priorities, but all depend on a healthy, ecological balance in our lake so that we can, fish with our kids and that they can continue doing that 30 years from now is really important. So that is a huge part of the story as well. And Darby was trying to say something about maybe the chat.
Yeah, it's a quick one. Can dredging eradicate hydrilla in the small area in the inlet?
Is that Tom Burke?
It is.
Nice.
So, ironically, Roxy has been talking about this. Obviously, there's talk of dredging the inlet, and if it is done at the proper time, which would be during the non-growing season, and if it is done with environmental dredging techniques that are able to capture that and have very minimus fallback, and dredging below where your viable tubers are, and you're disposing of that material and containing it so it doesn't get into another water body, then you can use dredging. It's just very costly usually to do that. So one of the right. So that's when we're looking at these management techniques, it's costs and all that.
And so money up front versus money every year into infinity.
But that's the point. You need to dredge anyway.
Right.
And it hasn't been done because everyone's been worried about hydrilla. There are ways to do it where you can get both things done.
Correct.
And actually have a positive outcome both ways. So don't think that you can't dredge, because you can. It's just it takes the right engineering, the right analysis and biology.
And you got to work with the environmental windows with fisheries crew and others. So, which I think wintertime for here would.
You might have to change a few laws. We've done that before.
So I want to turn it over to Sam if he would like to still say something, who's had his little yellow hand raised here.
Sure. Thanks, Liz. Just wanted to, I think all these are really good points. I'm glad to hear folks talking about the need for more information. I think that's what is at the core of a lot of the issues that everybody's bringing up. And I think that just would generally support that. I would also like to point out that I think kind of building on conversations that we've had with the bass angler groups regionally, I would just encourage people to continue to take part in helping to sort of gauge these things. I think all this like local kind of knowledge is really, really valuable. But it's really hard to quantify it when all we have is word of mouth. So I think I'm going to just make another claim to just participate in our macrophyte survey program at the Finger Lakes Prism. We train volunteers to keep an eye out. It's a great way to just kind of become active in this whole process, this seeking to learn more about our lake. These kind of these areas where we're seeing kind of uncharacteristic growth or a lack of growth. Again, I've gotten some points from some of the best angler folks. But I just want to continue to stress that that's super important. And, we can't be everywhere all the time. It's a huge lake. And just all the help that people can offer would be always, we always are interested in taking more data. So please share it with us. And I encourage you all to take part. Keep an eye out, fingerlakesinvasives.org for more information on how you can get in, participate next year. Thanks, Liz, for putting on the meeting.
Thanks, Sam.
And Roxy, thank you.
All right. Okay, with that, I want to thank the panelists. You might have time to catch them for a question or two afterwards, but we'll also be doing some follow-up. So you can submit your questions to me at the network, that's Stuart@CayugaLake.org, and I will make sure you're connected with the person you need to be connected with. So thank you for participating and presenting tonight, and Sam online as well. Thank you. And remember, this is the first session of a two-part series. So this is the, regularly scheduled Hydrilla program, but next week we have a session that's going to be our larger conference session at the Museum of the Earth that's focused on nutrient loading in our lake and water quality, which is another really important topic. So
Co-hosted by
yes.
Cayuga Lake Watershed Intermunicipal organization. So larger lake impacts, HABs, phosphorus loading. If you're interested in that, come to that meeting as well, and there'll be snacks as well, right?
There will be snacks as well.
Yes.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you everyone online. Have a nice evening. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
I see your comment in the chat. We're gonna make sure that's saved, okay?
I was watching it, and then all of a sudden it was like, and then